Hi there, friends. I'm glad to be back today, and today we're going to be discussing the 9 symptoms of BPD, or borderline personality disorder. So let's jump right in with the first symptom. The first symptom we'll discuss today is the fear of abandonment. People with BPD are terrified of being abandoned or left alone, and that includes real abandonment, when somebody really abandons us, leaves us, cuts us out, ghosts us. And those are horrible feelings. Most of us feel very empty by. We don't understand why somebody did that, and it can be very emotional. But also perceived abandonment. And let me explain that a little bit more. So perceived abandonment means, for example, let's say that the person with BPD texts somebody, sends out a text, and the other person doesn't respond for maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes and still hasn't responded. That's immediately DEFCON 5 to some degree, because why are they not responding? What's going on? And usually they'll begin to text and text and text to try to figure out what's happening, because they feel like the person has abandoned them. You know, it's much like not getting a call. If they have called somebody and haven't received a call back in several minutes or even several hours, that can feel like true abandonment as well. And so understanding that fear of abandonment can trigger things that might not actually be real abandonment, but can actually feel like the person's leaving them or abandoning them. And so that's where the real and perceived abandonment is so important to understand when we're looking at BPD. Second symptom are relationships, and those relationships are unstable in nature. So most of these relationships start off extremely quickly, extremely quick, and there's no boundaries. So any relationship that you've ever started off like this with no boundaries whatsoever are going to be quite unstable relationships, whether they're romantic or whether they're friendships. So this is definitely something to look at as far as a symptom and sign with somebody with BPD. The next symptom is unclear or shifting self-image. Okay, what that means is that the person does not have a clear self-image of who they are. And also, a lot of times this same person is taking on mannerisms or sayings of the people around them. So let's say that they're in a relationship, a romantic relationship, and very quickly they start taking on the sayings of that other person. They might start having mannerisms like that other person, liking the music or the food that that other person likes. And so they take on a different self-image a lot of times with different relationships. And that's why it's shifting a lot, because they don't really know who they are at their core. The next is impulsive and self-destructive behaviors. Now this is twofold. So you have the impulsive behavior, which is, driving fast, road rage, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, using drugs and alcohol. It could also be, sex, promiscuous sex, putting yourself in danger in those situations, gambling, things like that. So that's one part. The second part is that self-sabotage, self-destructive piece. And so the self-sabotage applies to the individual. They will do things to self-sabotage themselves, on even sometimes on a daily, even on a multi-daily situation. But also they have a tendency of sabotaging their relationships as well, and not realizing what they're doing, because they're already fearing the abandonment piece, that the person's going to abandon them. So they're already feeling that, and so they push that person even farther away, not even realizing they're doing it. They actually have no idea that they're doing it, and if they knew they were doing it, they wouldn't do it. But the thing is that they don't. And so ultimately, a lot of times they will sabotage the relationship, and then when the person leaves, they go, see, I knew this person was going to abandon me. But ultimately, they self-sabotage is not only within the things that they do to themselves, but they also self-sabotage external relationships as well. The next one is self-harm. And I think that most of us think about somebody cutting their wrist, right? That's your automatic thought, is that somebody's cutting their wrist, or, trying to commit suicide. And yes, that's definitely a possibility here. But there's other possibilities of self-harm too. One that comes to mind immediately is eating disorders, right? So self-harm, if you're going to self-harm yourself, is to starve yourself. Now I think that can be hand in hand here, because the self-harm piece, when you think about an eating disorder, a lot of folks that have eating disorders do that because it's something that they feel they can control, okay, because they feel out of control. So I want you to think about that the self-harm is not just suicide or cutting your wrist. It could be an eating disorder. It could be starving yourself. It could be various different aspects of that. And so that's something to think about, because I think we automatically go to the suicide before we think of the other options. The next symptom is extreme emotional swings, and I think that speaks for itself, is that emotions kind of swing back and forth. They can be very positive, very negative, And they can actually swing even within a few minutes or a few hours or a few days. It kind of depends on, you have to look at that cycle pattern for that actual individual. So let's say that you're married to or in a relationship with, or a brother or sister or somebody that you think may have signs and symptoms of BPD. They may go through multiple emotions in a single day. And it's hard when you're with that person, because sometimes you can feel as though you can feel pain from it, or you can feel upset about it, or you can feel as though you're bringing this on them. But remember, a lot of times this is coming from within them and how they're feeling. Also, the extreme emotional swings comes from the fact that a lot of folks with BPD feel an extreme amount of emotion. And it's very hard for them to control their emotion. And so they feel things so deeply and so much that it's really hard to control. So anger can just ignite very quickly and go out just as quickly. And then sometimes that's not the case. Somebody can get very angry. Maybe you're having an argument with your spouse and you find that the person you think has symptoms of BPD is following you around the room for the next 2 hours, won't stop, yelling, keeping you up at night, not allowing the argument to stop. These things are very apparent in these situations because how they're feeling is so deep, they're having trouble being able to control those emotions. And so that's why we have these emotional swings, because they feel like the slightest change and they can feel it so deeply and they can swing into that next emotion. And it's usually always based on their thoughts in here. It's not necessarily always based on what's going on around them. And so sometimes you might not even expect what's about to happen, and it can really take you off target because you're not aware of what's happening in their mind. Another symptom is chronic feelings of emptiness, feeling empty. And this is interesting because a lot of us feel lonely. Some of us can feel empty at times. Some of us can feel sad at times, and that's normal. But that chronic feeling of emptiness in this situation doesn't seem to go away. So no matter who they're hanging out with, no matter who they're spending time with, no matter the activity or what they're doing, it doesn't change how they feel. So it's almost like an emptiness that cannot be filled up. It cannot go away. And a lot of times when we're in relationships with folks that demonstrate this, you may try to help them, you may try to reinforce with them, you may try to shower them with love and tell them how beautiful they are or how amazing they are, but it doesn't seem to ever really connect because they don't believe it themselves. So there's that chronic feeling of emptiness, even if they're in a room full of people, even if they're being showered with lots of affirmations, it's not coming from here, it's coming from the outside. And so that's a very serious situation that folks with BPD tendencies have to look at, because that's the underlying issue as well, is there's not a feeling of feeling good enough, and there's not a feeling of feeling whole. And that's a big caveat here. And last but not least, we have explosive anger. And I think that goes hand in hand with the extreme emotional swings. And explosive anger can kind of come out of the middle of nowhere, and it can happen. Usually that explosive anger is quick to ignite and quick to go away, but definitely it's very interesting to watch. Many people get embarrassed by it. When they see it, they get embarrassed. If they're in if they're in public and their significant other or whatever has an explosive event, it can be embarrassing. But understanding that it's almost like the way that they can let go of this emotion. This emotion is literally festering up so much, and it's so overwhelming, and it's so stressful that something has to come out. And so that's when you see that explosive anger, when it's just literally, it's like the last moment they can handle it, and then they're going to explode. And usually they will calm down after that, but sometimes in that explosive anger, it can be turned on someone else. And that's where the kind of the perfect storm happens, when explosive anger is taken out on someone else that doesn't deserve it, or is taken out on you and you don't understand it. That can be hard to understand where that person's coming from. And so realizing that usually that's when the person has hit their threshold of ability to maintain composure, if they've hit their threshold of dealing with their emotions, they cannot process anymore. That's when it comes out, either yelling or screaming or throwing something or kicking something or breaking something or throwing a phone against the wall. Whatever it looks like, that's when you see that explosive anger. In upcoming future videos, I'm going to take each one of these symptoms separately and really explain so you can really understand the ins and outs of each one of these symptoms. And remember, many of us can have some of these symptoms of BPD. It doesn't mean that you have BPD. It just means that we have some symptoms of that, whether it's abandonment or unstable relationships. But remember, we need to have like 4 or more of these symptoms to really be able to say, okay, maybe this is something I really need to look into. But even if you only have a few symptoms, looking at to understand, why do I feel this way? Why do I have some of these unstable relationships? Why do I have these emotional swings? So this can really help us to understand ourselves as well as the people around us too. Because once we have knowledge, we're not trying to figure this out in the dark. We have some information and knowledge to say, okay, this might be part of what we're dealing with. This might be part of what she or he's dealing with. And that makes it easier for me to process and understand. And it also makes it maybe easier for you to understand that it's not you. And so sometimes it's better when we can see that, because when we have a tendency of maybe owning things that maybe we don't need to own, but also maybe when we don't understand something completely clear, we don't understand where somebody's coming from, or also how to understand and help them, as well as how to understand where we are and how to protect ourselves. Let me know how you feel about the information that I provided here in this video. Is there something that you would add to it as well? I'm very interested in hearing from you. And definitely, if there's a certain symptom that you would like me to really discuss in depth, I'm interested in hearing about that too. So definitely add that into the comments section. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. And if this content has helped you, give us a like here, because it helps us to understand that we're doing something right and that we're connecting with you as well. So stay tuned. New videos coming up, specific videos on the symptoms of BPD. And don't forget to live your true life.